at 7 o'clock. We have a quorum. So if we would join the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we thank you, dear Lord, for allowing us to gather in this room, dear Lord, into the safety and sanctuary of your safety. Dear Lord, we ask that you give us clear hearts and minds as we go about the county business, dear Lord, and help us make the best decisions for its citizens. These and other prayers we ask. Amen.
So next would be public comment. If anyone has public comment, wish to address the board, please come up, state your name and address. And please remember, we've got about a 3-minute time interval.
Good evening. My name is John Edgar, 42050 Stafford Lane, King George. I'm here to talk a little bit about the micro winery. I received a definition of the micro winery in email, and I just want to read it here and concur with it. Microbrewery, cider, distillery, or winery, a small-scale establishment primarily engaged in the production of alcoholic beverages including beer, wine, cider, and other spirits on site for retail or wholesale sale. Beer production capacity shall not exceed 15,000 barrels per year. Production of distilled spirits, wine, or alcoholic cider shall not exceed 5,000 barrels per year. Microbrewery, cider, distillery, or winery may include a restaurant or public tasting room as an accessory use. Establishments must be licensed by the Virginia Department of Alcohol Beverage Control and shall operate in accordance with any requirements by the Code of Virginia or other applicable laws. I just want to say that I do concur with this definition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Shannon Jernigan, 13299 Jersey Road, King George, Virginia. If you'd have asked me 10 years ago if I would be an owner or a host of a short-term rental, I would have probably said no. However, life has opportunities and unexpected circumstances, and I was afforded the opportunity to consider that as an option for a property we have in an adjacent county. As a property owner, I was afforded the option to consider sale, rent, or relocation to that property. This particular property has been in the family for nearly 100 years. Sale was ruled out, of course, and my family has established a network and a school community here in King George, and we were not ready to relocate to another county. I was left to consider renting, short-term or long-term. After a little research, the house was transformed, special insurances were purchased, and business licenses were also purchased, and we started this new adventure. Why am I telling you this? If you read the 7312 short-term rental documentation in the draft ordinance, it says the owner of a short-term rental unit, lease, or short-term rental with a lease agreement that is 1 year or greater in length who occupies the property as his or her principal place of residence. In determining that compliance with these regulations, I would have to show proof that that is my primary residence. If that language remains, then I would not have been able to do that as a short-term rental. The language would have eliminated that option for me. Anyone should have the option to consider that. Do we need to be careful about where we want to go this county to go? Of course, we can limit the number of properties that a certain individual could own or have the right regulations in place to ensure guests have proper places to stay. But those options should remain for property owners who pay property taxes and support their local communities. Given our close proximity to the base, other people may go TDY or temporary duty stations, that they may want to have short-term rental options for their own properties while they go to classes or other work locations temporarily. I strongly recommend revising the language currently in the draft ordinance, and thank you for your time.
Ms. Stein, is anyone online?
No, Mr. Chairman.
We'll close public comment. All right, approval of meeting minutes. We'll do it one at a time. 10 January, discussion, comments?
Um, just a question of process. These recordings are part of the record, aren't they? We keep the recordings of these meetings. I'm asking because some of the transcriptions are clearly just, transcription errors. I don't really want to go through each and every one of them.
Yes, we retain the video recordings.
For how long?
I save them on my hard drive and they're there forever as long as you need them.
Okay.
But they're also on what's recorded from the YouTube channel.
One sec. All right, there's just one issue on page 26 I do want resolved in the record. Bullet point number 3, where Mr. DeVries stated, second sentence, the exception is to avoid building a road all the way back to the last lot with 18 feet width and 6 inches duck gravel. I never said duck gravel. I don't want that on the record that I did. I think I just said just gravel.
We'll correct that, no problem.
Thank you.
We have a motion to accept director's report for 10 January with exceptions.
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, let's move on. Oh, yeah, abstain.
I have to abstain.
Abstention. January 24th. Motion to accept.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? One abstention?
2 abstentions.
2. Oh, yeah, who's, yeah. Okay, do we have Mr. Hastings available for the report? All right, Mr. Hastings, over to you, sir.
Good evening. No report from me tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, no plan review? Okay. So this is a public hearing for case number 2302Z02, amendment to the King George County zoning ordinance to remove hospital as by right use for the general trade district C2 and to allow the use of hospital as a use permitted only by special exception in the general trade district C2. So I open the floor to public comment. Oh. Sorry. For public comment.
They don't make these for people over 60. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I'm Richard. I'm a planner with the Community Development Office. And tonight I'm going to give a brief overview of case number 2302-02, amendment to the King George County zoning ordinance. So on February 20th, the King George County Board of Supervisors directed staff to amend the ordinance by removing hospital as a by right use in the general trade district. And to allow hospital as a use permitted only by special exception in the general trade C2 district. A hospital, as defined in section 1.9 definitions of terms, is any institution receiving inpatients and rendering medical, surgical, and/or obstetrical care. This shall include general hospitals and institutions in which service is limited to special fields such as cardiac, eye, nose, throat, pediatric, orthopedic, skin, cancer, mental, tuberculosis, chronic disease, and obstetrics. The term hospital shall also include sanitariums and sanatoriums, including those where feeble-minded, mental patients, alcoholics, senile psychotics, and drug addicts are treated and cared for under supervision of licensed medical personnel. This proposed text amendment will remove hospital as a by right use in the general trade district. This is an amendment to section 2.10. If you turn your attention to the draft text amendment, this is Article 2, I believe page 37, you'll notice that the use of hospital is not being added to section 2.10.3. Its additional use is permitted by special exception in the general trade district, that's C2. That's because hospitals are permitted by special exception in the retail commercial C1 district. And section 2.10.3, additional uses permitted by special exception, item 4 reads, all uses permitted by special exception within the retail commercial district C1. Since the use of hospital is permitted by special exception in the C1 zoning district, it is automatically permitted by special exception in the general trade C2 district. The use is also permitted by special exception in the industrial light district. And with that, I will end on the recommendation from staff to the King George County Planning Commission to forward case number 2302-02 to remove hospital as a by right use in the general trade district C2 and to allow the use of hospital as a use permitted only by special exception in the general trade district C2 to the King George County Board of Supervisors with a recommendation of approval. I'd also like to mention that Ms. Washington, our Assistant County Attorney, is present tonight. It's scheduled later in the agenda, but she has gone through the code in regards to the hospital definition. We thought it'd be beneficial to go ahead and give it to you now, just so you have all the information in front of you. Thank you.
Personally, I'd appreciate that. You guys okay with that?
Yep.
Can I ask for a clarification from staff before we go to public hearing?
Sure, we got one more.
I got one question for staff. Was this a unanimous request from the Board of Supervisors?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So back in January, this commission asked me to look into the hospital definition to see what concerns there might be with removing drug and alcohol treatment centers. So I did, do some research on that and found that there would be a few legal concerns if we tried to remove just drug and alcohol treatment centers from the hospital definition. And we shared that information with you and the Board of Supervisors. And based on that, the supervisors directed staff to make the text amendment to remove hospitals as written from by right to special exception in C2 districts.
So that's really what we're looking at here, is to change the use matrix. And just move it over. Discussion? I'm sorry, public hearing.
I'll add one more thing that may be beneficial. In the future ordinance that we are currently drafting, it is by special exception in the C1, C2, and industrial light. So this text amendment would reflect what we've done with the future ordinance.
Should we open the floor for public comment? Mr. Dines, anyone online?
No, Mr. Chairman.
All right, close public comment, discussion.
So just quick question. So Ms. Washington, the way that the language has been revised currently, if we were to revise, or excuse me, accept these revisions, excuse me, that doesn't open the county for any potential litigious fallout on the back end, like we're all clear by removing it, and by removing a hospital in its entirety vice a special subset of hospital?
Yeah, so the definition is unchanged. We're just moving the definition as it's written now
Gotcha.
from by right to special exception. So there's not going to be, shouldn't be any legal concerns with just moving it from one classification to another.
Okay, thank you.
And it's just the ordinance as it's written now, because as we have the updates and the draft form, this would change anyway to special exception C2.
Yes, it's just as written now.
Discussion?
Just something to think about. Would Pyramid have come here if they knew they had to go through the special exception process? When we first had public comment on revising the ordinance, there was a lot of discussion about shortening the time frame of development in the county and getting around this need. So just something to think about.
One thing I want to mention is that even though we're moving it to special exception, you still can't treat anyone coming under the classification any differently. So if it is a drug treatment center, it can't be treated any differently from anything else. So we just can only make decisions based on zoning laws and principles.
I do see the benefit of the special exception in that we don't have really large tracts of C2 or C1 where there's something like this could be hidden. It would be very near residential districts in almost any C2 district we have right now. So I think that argues very strongly for the special exception.
Any further discussion? Motion?
I
I make
move,
a motion that we forward case number 23-02-Z02 to the Board of Supervisors with a recommendation of approval.
Second?
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes. Did Ross vote? Mr. Reeves, did you vote? I did. Okay. Word. All right.
Okay, old business. Zoning subdivision ordinance discussion. Heather,
I have one
oh, sorry.
matter, if I may. Is this the appropriate place for this, or you
We're gonna hit you up next,
beg your pardon?
sir.
Yes, so as an update, I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but the Board of Supervisors did approve Berkeley Group to do that change order to include a deeper review of data centers, battery storage, power plants, solar, and noise. So we will be having a joint work session with them on April 25th and May 30th at 6 p.m. You will divide that work between those two meetings. So at this time, the overhaul process is on hold to make this a priority. But that does not get you off of your homework. So please send in any comments or changes that you would like to see in that overhaul.
So Ms. Hall, when's our new suspense date for the overall? Like, but originally we were supposed to be done in June with all the overhauls. Where is that pushed to now?
I think that will probably be part of the discussion that you will have with Berkeley Group at those work sessions. I don't have that at this time.
So was that the light version?
No, that's the heavy version.
Oh, it's the heavy version.
They went all in.
We went all in.
All in.
Somebody opened their wallet.
Yes, sir.
Nice. That's a plate.
And then I do believe Mr. Fox has something to bring to the commission as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, the origin of my proposed example ordinance here is that when I reviewed the draft zoning ordinance, on the one hand, we see a very enlightened approach towards inviting microbreweries, micro distilleries, craft wineries, and so on, and also event locations and spaces on a large scale and so forth. But on the other hand, in the same breath, I saw that a proposed noise ordinance that basically all amplified music had to stop by 10 p.m. So I thought, well, that's a little bit incongruous when you have that type of business, a craft brewery or a craft distillery type of thing with a tasting room tends to draw a after dinner crowd and so on. And if we wanted to cut music off by 10, that's going to be tough on the business, especially because they're going to try to draw customers from not just within the county, but beyond its borders. So what I thought I would do is propose a kind of compromise type of reference ordinance. That I didn't mean for this to be, verbatim type of thing, but whereby we'd, make provision where if C1 or C2 locations that had these type of microbrewery, micro distillery, hospitality businesses were properly distanced from residential or agricultural areas, they could kind of form one zone where with a slightly later noise ordinance. And if you're closer to a residential area, then if they really insisted on the 10 p.m., well, then in those areas that could be 10 p.m. As well, microbreweries and this type of thing, that often they may have a little backyard space where people will sit at picnic tables and so on. But the way that the draft zoning ordinance is written now, it could catch inadvertently those small areas, just little backyard areas, in with some of the requirements that appear to be, conceived more for, like go-kart tracks or carnivals or large recreation outdoor facility spaces. It doesn't seem to contemplate just a little backyard venue. So what I'd like to suggest is that essentially we submit this to our consultant who's drafting this, the Berkeley Group, as a reference to say, could you work with this in some fashion to create a compromise position, basically, so that again, if you're appropriately distanced from residential or agriculturally zoned areas, you can have the benefit of a little bit later music shut off, essentially, and you can still have that more restrictive provision if they want it in areas that are close to residential.
You want to generate another one?
You
want to generate another work order, additional work?
No, I mean, this. I think maybe you were at the working group meeting we had with the Board of Supervisors, and this is something I think is more of a tweak. And I advised them that I would be sending this their way, and it would be in the nature of a tweak. I mean, if you look at this, it's. I would propose personally submitting this as is, but if not with the instruction that they simply take it or leave it, but that they use it as a reference, as a guide to try to work with the spirit of this, essentially, to craft that compromise. That's all.
So before we get into discussion, let's formalize this a little bit. If we close old business and go to new business, we can pick this up. Good? All right, close old business, new business. Case number 2302Z01. Mr. Stewart.
Can you bring up the presentation? All right. Okay, so back on January 17th, 2023, the King George County Board of Supervisors directed staff to amend the ordinance to include the use of micro winery in the commercial districts, C1 and C2. Staff has kept this consideration in mind during the overhaul of the zoning and subdivision ordinance. Although we already permit microbreweries in our ordinance, it is beneficial to combine the use and definition to also include micro cideries, micro distilleries, and micro wineries as well. So the current zoning ordinance allows for these establishments in the agricultural zoning districts under an agricultural farming use, where the products used for the manufacture of alcoholic beverages like beer, cider, liquor, or wine are grown on site. However, the ordinance does not permit these establishments where the products are not grown on site in any zoning district. The first proposed amendment would be to section 1.9, definitions of terms. Proposed definition is microbrewery, cidery, distillery, or winery. A small-scale establishment primarily engaged in the production of alcoholic beverages, including beer, wine, cider, or other spirits on site for wholesale or retail sale. Beer production capacity shall not exceed 15,000 barrels per year. Production of distilled spirits, wine, or alcoholic cider shall not exceed 5,000 barrels per year. A microbrewery, cidery, distillery, or winery may include a restaurant or public tasting room as an accessory use. Establishments must be licensed by the Virginia Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control and shall operate in accordance with any requirements by the Code of Virginia or other applicable laws. If you turn to the first proposed amendment attachment, you will see that this definition merely replaces that of microbrewery, so it's located in the same place. The second proposed amendment will be to section 2.9.2, retail commercial uses permitted by right. This amendment will include the use microbrewery, cidery, distillery, or winery as the use permitted by right in the retail commercial C1 zoning district. Similar to the definition, this would be located in the same place as microbreweries. It would still be item 25A. Additionally, permitting microbreweries, cideries, distilleries, or wineries in the retail commercial district C1 will automatically permit the use in the general trade district C2. The uses would also be permitted as ancillary in the industrial districts. And with that, we can end on the recommendation from the Community Development staff to the Planning Commission to schedule a public hearing for case number 230201, amendment to the King George County zoning ordinance to allow microbreweries, cideries, distilleries, or wineries in the retail commercial district C1 and general trade district C2. Amendments to sections 1.9 and 2.9. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, so what is the bottom line change to the definition? Current definition just says microbrewery?
Correct. So the current definition just addresses microbreweries, and it's essentially the same. We've just added to it. With the current microbreweries, they are limited at 15,000 barrels.
Is that a change? Because then we have a lower amount?
So the 5,000 barrels will be for liquor, cider, or wine. Beer would remain the same. It's kind of spelled out that way for limited limited breweries under the state manufacturing licenses. That's why in the adjacent localities, it's pretty much the same around the board for breweries.
And these are beverages that are distilled on that site, not brought in right there on that site.
That's correct. The difference is the products used for the distillation do not necessarily need to be grown on site.
Right.
So you wouldn't necessarily have to have a farm that goes along with the establishment.
The actual alcoholic beverage has to be produced on site, but the components can be brought in. They don't have to be grown or produced by that land. Discussion?
Do we want to talk about that tonight, or do we want to wait until the public hearing?
Well, if we need a public hearing for a text change.
That's what they're asking for.
So the process is if there are any changes that the Planning Commission would like to see, now would be the time to have that consensus. At this point, once you approve us to hold a public hearing, we will advertise, and then we have to have a public hearing and make that formal recommendation to the board.
But this is for changing the draft?
No, this is for changing our current ordinance. So the Board of Supervisors directed us to change or the planning commission to change it now rather than waiting for the new ordinance. That clear things up?
And we have to have a public hearing for that.
Yes, sir, we do.
All righty then. Discussion.
I saw something in the Spotsy ordinance. I can't find it right now, but it explicitly stated that these micro wineries, microbreweries could only sell that which was produced on site. In other words, they can't tap a keg of Bud and sell that too. Is that in our ordinance now? Or in the proposal now?
I'm not sure. Is it possible that you read that under the farm winery or brewery or cidery? That's a different license.
Right.
I thought it was in the Spotsy sample ordinance that you included in your package.
I don't think that's correct.
I mean, I'm trying to make sure that microbrewery is not a euphemism for a bar or an East Baltimore package store. I'm trying to find some way to limit what is done there.
Well, I think that's going to be governed by the state ABC regulations, right? If you have a restaurant in a microbrewery, and you have a certain proportion of your sales coming from food, then you're automatically allowed to include the sale of liquor produced off-site in the microbrewery. But that's only subject to the food sales, the ratio of food sales to overall sales.
And the
In other words,
license.
you can't have a bar without a restaurant.
This may
That's
also
by
answer your
license.
question. With the proposed definition, it reads a small-scale establishment primarily engaged in the production of alcoholic beverages. A tasting room would be accessory to that use.
Right, and I'm not hearing anything that explicitly states that the sales of that establishment are limited to what is produced by that establishment.
We could add it to the definition if you'd like.
I would object to that personally. I mean, if we have
Why?
more than one microbrewery in the county and we want to promote each other's product in some fashion, or if we have a county local winery that wants to get some exposure of its product in some fashion, we ought to be helping each other in that regard, not foreclosing those sorts of things. That's just my take on it.
Explain to me how this business is going to work.
There's the ABC laws, which I'm not very well versed in, but a microbrewery basically produces beer that it either sells wholesale or sells in its tasting room. But it doesn't foreclose the sale of somebody else's beer. I have to be careful when I say it because I believe the distinction is that it's, again, you have to refer back to the ABC law.
My
If
question
you're
would be,
selling food, yeah.
if you're licensed as as a brewery and you're making the beer, is that the exact same license that you get as a regular bar that sells other people's spirits? Are they the same
No,
license?
then you're subject to the sales of food as an overall proportion to your
Right.
total sales, right? You can't do it unless in other words, if you're selling the food, if you create that restaurant in the microbrewery and that sale of food goes up to I forget the threshold, it may be 40% of overall sales or something of that nature, then the state automatically allows you to sell other alcoholic beverages.
But aren't they two different licenses is my question. You have an ABC license to
You would
serve
still need
mixed
the ABC
beer and
license.
wine,
Sure.
and you have a license to be a microbrewery. They're two different licenses, right?
Yep.
If you're a microbrewery, you're not necessarily licensed to sell somebody else's beer.
Correct.
Only licensed
It's
to sell
only
your
if you
own, right?
apply for there's a separate ABC license. Either way, you need the ABC license, right? But there's a separate license if you're selling food and that food is a certain proportion of your overall sales.
Yeah, that's exactly the part that I don't know or understand is the licensing. So I don't know if any of this definition gets flushed out in the licensing and the termination factor of which license you get. So I don't feel like I'm prepared to make an informed decision.
I agree. I mean, I see Mr. DeVry's point of we don't want a microbrewery to just be another excuse to have another local bar and circumvent the regulations of having a bar. So I can see both sides of the issue there. I agree. We don't know what the licensing is. Unless maybe the county attorney could advise us on that. Are they two different licenses?
I have not looked into ABC licenses, but I can do that for you and get you some information.
Yes, I know for me, that's my question is I don't know if part of what Mr. Fox is approaching is handled via licensing or if it really is incumbent upon the language in our ordinance to drive the differentiation. I just don't know.
Okay, I can look into that.
So what's the harm in moving it forward now and then we could adjudicate it on the back end before it's incorporated fully into the final package of the zoning?
It depends on how much changes because what you're advertised is what you are limited to. But you could certainly table it at this time and we can come back with whatever information you would like at the next meeting. And then you could make your decision whether or not to forward it to the for a public hearing.
I think I'm still a little hung up on what are our objections to moving forward with it? What would be? I don't object you moving forward. And okay, so and with regard to any specific text amendments, is there any? What are our concerns there?
Was
I think I think you mentioned the noise ordinance as a separate. Okay. All right.
yeah, but when it comes to the ABC stuff, what I don't understand is allowing the sale of beverages produced elsewhere when the ordinance would focus on beverages produced on site.
The
And
distinction is the restaurant part.
well, and that's what I'm saying is I personally don't know the licensing. Therefore, I can't jump on the
You
bandwagon
don't have a
with you.
restaurant, you can only sell what you make. If you do have a restaurant and that restaurant, I believe, food sales total 40% of the revenue of overall sales, then you can be licensed by ABC to sell other forms of alcohol. But it's that food sale which is the catch.
So, and that goes to Mr. DeRee's point, where if the licensing provides that dividing rod, then it's clear we can change the language in the ordinance moving forward. But
I'm looking at the Virginia Code 15.2. It talks about limited brewery licenses, and it talks about they can sell food, but they're not necessarily a restaurant. They're still a microbrewery. So they probably, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but just reading this, it would be a completely different thing. They probably wouldn't get an ABC license because they're not classified as a restaurant.
because not selling spirits
That's
is
the way it seems to, that's the
wine
way
and
I
beer.
understood this to be. It says they can sell other things, as
cider.
food and so forth, but they sell what they make and not other people's products. So if you're licensed as a microbrewery, it seems you're not going to be licensed as a restaurant.
It's a separate
one or the other.
So then that would
Seems
mean
like to me.
it would have to be whatever they produce on
They'd have to
site.
sell what they produce, not other people.
They wouldn't be able to produce.
wine.
So you're saying we should just rely on the licensing, the law, licensing under law rather than including this also in the ordinance, that it should be limited to production on site?
Sounds like it might be, yeah, it might be out of our hands to decide it anyway. Myers?
I don't know.
I think you're gonna have to if we can parlay it to what the law is, the ABC laws, then you parlay it to that, I think. The thing I see in it, how big is a barrel? Some guys mention, some ordinance mention gallons and some do barrels and some do barrels of gallons. 55 is normal, is that?
That's correct. I looked at this one quite a lot because I had the same question. I was wondering why the Berkeley group did gallons and we were doing, that's a whole nother story. So in the Code of Virginia, Title 4.1-100, that's the definitions of the Alcohol Beverage and Cannabis Control Act. A barrel is defined as any container or vessel having a capacity of more than 43 ounces. So that really,
43 ounces?
yeah,
More than
that's
43.
correct. That really limits the enforcement to the size.
So it could be a 150-gallon barrel.
Yeah.
So-
Bigger than thermometer. Yeah.
To put that in perspective, we all think of a barrel, we think of like a whiskey barrel. It's about 50 gallons. So we take one of those is 50 gallons, you times it by 5,000. That's 250,000 gallons, which is drastically different than those of our neighbors.
All right.
I'd still rather see it hard coded in our own ordinance. I mean, ABC requirements aren't strictly laws that we cannot supersede. They're just requirements of a licensing requirement which could change over time. So I'd really like to see it hard coded.
So then now we're back to what falls under our purview versus what falls under an ABC licensing purview, correct? So we want to make sure that we get that nailed down. So do we want to then table it for next time, or so that we make sure that we get it just about perfect?
I think tabling is a good idea.
That way we'll get it right out of the gate. I mean, is that okay?
No motion.
Motion?
Yes.
Well, hold on, but who's got the action to go look into it? Is it staff or the attorney? Okay, I don't want to volunteer anybody.
I can look into that.
Can you tell us exactly what it is that you want us to look into?
So if I captured it correctly, and please jump in and correct me because my small reptilian brain is firing on just a few synapses right now. But so I guess what I'm thinking is we've got to figure out what's the delineation between what ABC we control versus what our ordinances would dictate as far as what we can include in the art of the possible. Is that correct?
So like the manufacturing licenses?
I think manufacturing as well as manufacturing and sales and then subsequent sales of other manufactured products that aren't manufactured on site at that particular activity.
You're wondering if county code can supersede ABC
No, I don't know if
licensing
it's,
requirements?
yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily a matter of supersession or a matter of which
Be
one
more
dictates.
restrictive.
Well, or which one would dictate. Yeah, I think you're probably gonna have one that clearly overrides another. And I think it's gonna be the ABC one.
Which is conflict.
Right. Did I capture that
I
correctly?
think you captured it well. So.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. All right.
One question. Did we get a consensus on if we want to differentiate of what is a bar versus a brewery? Is that also something that the planning commission has a consensus across the board of concern?
My only distinction was if you license as a restaurant, then you can you have to make a decision whether you're a microbrewery or a restaurant. If you're a microbrewery, I don't think the ABC, my recollection is now, does allow you to sell anybody else's product other than your own. But since we're now contemplating having a restaurant as part of this draft ordinance, if you then to say, well, I no longer want to be a microbrewery, I now want to be licensed as a restaurant, then those ABC laws would apply, which then allow you to be a full service restaurant selling anybody's product. So I guess the question becomes, if you're a restaurant, can you microbrew as a restaurant, or do you have to be strictly a microbrewery to do your own brewing? That's where I see the gray area. Yeah.
Do we have consensus on that? I said, do we have consensus on that? Is that across the planning commission?
I'm good.
Can I add one more thing before we do a motion? I actually looked up the manufacturing licenses in the state of Virginia. So this is Title 4.1-206.1. I'll read distiller's license just as an example. Distiller's license, which shall authorize the licensee to manufacture alcoholic beverages other than wine and beer, and to sell and deliver or ship the same in accordance with the board regulations, in closed containers to the board and to persons outside of the Commonwealth for retail sale outside of the Commonwealth. When the board has established a government store on the distiller's license premise pursuant to subsection D, such license shall also authorize the licensee to make charge to consumers and to participate in organized tasting event conducted in accordance with subsection G and the board regulations. There's also wineries and breweries if you'd like me to read those as well.
Yeah, so that's my question. What are the categories of licenses in front of you?
So there are,
We don't have to read all the definitions, but I'm
Sure.
just wanting to understand.
so there's subcategories for each
Perfect.
distilleries, wineries, breweries. In each one of those categories, there's the main, say, distiller's license. There's also a limited distiller's license, which does not apply because that is only applicable on located on farmland within the Commonwealth zoned agriculture. And then there's also a limited license, and that also has the same restriction where it must be located on a farm in the Commonwealth on land zoned agricultural. Neither of the two would apply to the microbreweries or distilleries because these would be in the commercial districts. So they would be required to get the full-on distiller's license. Maybe in the subsection, it gives them a maximum amount, but I think from what I found with the other jurisdictions is that the locality sets the restriction on how much they can have, which would make sense why each neighboring locality pretty much has a different amount. That makes sense.
All right, I'm confused. So,
No, I'm confused. You're talking about businesses or hobbies?
well, so, yeah.
From where I sit, or what I read, I think what was proposed by the group is clear, concise, and works very well. It's just going to have to comport with all relevant ABC regulations that pertain to it. That's basically it in a nutshell. But I liked the way you drafted it. To me, it makes perfect sense.
So I guess what I think I'm understanding is the licensing law, it's the licensing law, it's in there. And then what we're looking at is rigidity of our ordinance and not speaking to the noise piece at this point, but we're adding to the definition in our ordinance, the cider, microbrews, and we're increasing the volume.
We're leaving the beer capacity as it was, and we're introducing a capacity for spirits, cider, and wine.
That spirit and wine was not in there before.
That's correct, unless you were doing it as an agricultural use where you had a vineyard, and then I don't believe we have any restrictions on that.
There was sample ordinance, page 5, Stafford, section 28-39, special regulations for microbrewery. Any microbrewery shall be licensed by the Virginia Department of Alcohol Beverage Control as a brewery. Only beer products that are produced on the premises shall be sold by the facility. Any sales for on premises and off premises consumption shall be in accordance with the licensing requirements. That's where I saw it. I liked it. Is that,
That's the standard definition of a microbrewery. It's only a question of if you introduce the restaurant part of the business, then is there an election to be made at one point? Do I want to be licensed as a restaurant and still have my tanks on site and brew? Or do I want to remain?
something has to be the
licensed as a-
ancillary use.
Right.
Something has to be primary and something has to be ancillary.
Right.
So
I mean,
if
this is sort of an academic on my part, sort of an academic debate, because if you're licensed as a microbrewery, you're a microbrewery. There's nothing you can do about it.
So
You're
to
a
me, that's what we're talking about here, right? So this whole conversation is about microbrew.
Correct.
So let's not introduce the restaurant piece because that would be a completely separate license.
All right, so
And I
you're
think that would
saying you're
expand.
allowed to brew, you can brew beer in a restaurant even though you're not a microbrewery?
So without knowing the licensing, I can't say that.
Okay.
But what's in front of us today for discussion is the microbrew. So I think if we can really focus on what the intended text amendment is, and that's focused on the microbrew. So we'll start this up again. Discussion on specifically the language expanding the definition of microbrewery to include the other elements, the cider and wine. I think so too. Any issue?
I just want to restate, I like the language in the Stafford sample, page 5.
Because it introduces the fact that there's no selling off the premises.
Off premises, it's limiting to that which is produced on premises.
I have one follow-up question. So there's a consensus on that special regulation, item 2, where it says only beer products that are produced on the premises shall be sold by the facility. We could also incorporate wine, cider, and distilled spirits, the same aspect. Is that the consensus of the commission?
Is anyone else in the same mind as Mr. Reeves?
As usual.
All right, well. If we're still focused on the microbrew definition, then what was written, I think there needs to be a separate discussion that speaks to the noise ordinance. So if we want to table that piece of this discussion and look for a motion based on the language expanding the definition of microbrews, if we can settle on that.
Would the noise element fall under the noise ordinance? So that would,
So it's my understanding what Berkeley Group is working on for noise is primarily focused on industrial noise, not this type of noise. But we can certainly check in. Because I do remember that there's part of the draft ordinance that we spent some time discussing when the appropriate cutoff would be.
Yeah, when we were talking about special event venues.
right.
Mm-hmm. And if that's something that the planning commission is interested in taking a second look, staff can bring that back for discussion of what we have drafted. So that you could look at what we actually have drafted in that ordinance and if you want to make any changes to those time periods.
Personally, I would like to have us, I propose we ought to take a second look with respect to noise, and again, separate issue completely from the definition of microbrewery or what have you.
I think we came to a consensus about noise because it was it was a complaint that was brought forth, correct? Is that how it initially started? We dug into it.
Well, we'd be looking for a motion now to
Okay.
to accept the text change.
I'd like to make a motion to.
Any more discussion? We're ready for a motion. That's
Wait.
Well,
We can't hear what your motion is.
we don't know yet. That's it.
Okay.
This was circulated amongst the planning commission for a couple of months, but I don't know if people have had time now to look at it or to consider it. I don't know if it's fair of me to try to, have people had a chance to look at it up till now or consider it? I'm only proposing that we essentially, I move essentially that we submit it to the Berkeley group for either adoption or reference to adopt its compromise mechanics in some form, basically.
Well, the objective on the table is we change the current ordinance. Right? That's the directive here.
For microbreweries, distilleries, cideries, etc.
Correct.
Okay, what I submitted,
I think we're blurring the lines here. I think the first one we need to make a decision on is this that you have in front of you. Do you want to move forward and schedule a public hearing, or would you like to see a change beforehand?
personally, I'm happy with what you've drafted, but I don't want to hold, I mean, if people want to continue to work it, that's okay by me. Okay, I move that we hold a public hearing to consider the ordinance as drafted and submitted this evening.
You want to schedule a public hearing, Mr. Fox?
If that's the procedure to adopt it, then
motion.
yes,
So your motion would be to schedule a public hearing.
Yes.
Okay, I move that we schedule a public hearing.
Thank you.
Any
All right.
seconds?
We have a motion. Any seconds?
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
That's-
So now, noise in reference to event venues, things of that nature.
And
So
that's
here are our options.
draft ordinance.
The draft ordinance, yes. So here are our options. The staff can bring back what's drafted and refresh our memories of what we previously discussed. Or you can make a motion to send it to Berkeley, as Mr. Fox has mentioned. What I don't want is us to direct Berkeley to change it, and we are not sure that that's what we want.
Sure.
Because that's when those change orders come in and we bring up a bill. So those are our two options at this point.
Okay, let me,
Or you leave it the way it's drafted. Those, I guess you have three.
there is another approach potentially. I mean, the point of this draft that I proposed to submit to Berkeley Group was only to highlight a compromise position where we take account of where these places are actually located, or an appropriate distance from a residential or agricultural or non-commercially zoned lot. Then I proposed 11 p.m. type of thing, which is what it is currently. And if they still want to keep 10 p.m. in areas where you're closer to residential, and I mean that's the essence of zoning, isn't it?
So that sounds like a revisit to me.
It is. It
Well,
is. It is.
them-
because as I said, the blanket 10 p.m. change from 11 p.m. that it currently is to 10 p.m. in view of now bringing in these types of businesses, to me is incongruous.
So
And we'll
so it's a revisit to. Neither of you were privileged to, because you were not on the board at the time. So I think it would behoove of you to maybe hear it from what we
What's
drafted.
What's drafted?
Right. So you can be brought up to par and then we can have an appropriate discussion with everyone on the same field.
The draft that I saw just was a blanket 10 p.m. no
Well,
amplified noise
Well,
anywhere in the
but
county.
again, you weren't privileged to the discussion as to how we got there. So I think if you visit it in that manner, then you can understand how we got to that decision, and perhaps then your mind may be changed. I don't know,
It's
Let's
unlikely.
go around the horn here.
My concern with this, although I see the point, it's something that Heather kind of touched on, is it seems to me it's more than a tweak. If it goes to Berkeley Group, it seems like it's a whole nother revisit that might entail another work order and have to pay for more work for them to redo a whole section of it rather than just what we consider a tweak. So that would be my biggest concern with sending this to the Berkeley Group. So that makes sense.
A revisit.
I did the work for them essentially, but they can.
Any others?
I've been trying to think of is there someone in particular that's looking for this?
Yeah, I mean, if you read my initial memo to the, perhaps you haven't had a chance. It was, I guess, 6 weeks or so ago, but it was circulated to this body, and I made full disclosure that I'm contemplating an investment in a microbrewery here in Dahlgren, which is in a C2 area and is more than almost 1,000 yards from the closest residentially zoned piece of land or agriculturally zoned piece of land. And I want to know why I have to shut off the radio at 10 o'clock at night when I'm trying to bring people in as far away, maybe from Fredericksburg or from Colonial Beach, who after dinner want to come and have a beer. They get there at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and they got 1 hour. I can't run a business that way. So as I'm saying, if you're in an area where nobody lives around you, perhaps we can zone it one way. If you're in an area where you do have people who would be impacted by it, zone it another way. I mean, surely we can contemplate visions like that.
Sound travels differently too. I can think of event venues that are on hundreds of acres that their neighbors still hear the sound, and they're nowhere near any.
So
they've got music going.
So this is
We're talking about indoors here.
well, this is a step, a direction I don't want to go in just yet. I don't want to debate the merits of the noise issue. I just want to bring to the surface, we're looking to either pull the noise ordinance up, take another look at it, revisit it, have the discussion, determine if we want to send it to Berkeley Group for any kind of upgrades, and then we would text amendments. Then we would have to make sure that whatever that, because everything costs money, and we'd have to get approval for that. So if we just stay focused on whether we revisit or send the language to Berkeley Group for the draft ordinance. So that's what I'm looking for now.
If the commission would like, you can send me, Mr. Fox, you can send me what you have on the noise ordinance, what you'd like to be incorporated, and I can review it. That way you can have someone look at it if you guys don't want to send it off to Berkeley.
Yeah, that's the thing, is we really don't want to send it to Berkeley Group without knowing what it is we're looking for.
Yes, you can
Because
send it
then
to
we'd
me.
So I think we we have staff bring up where we are right now and what we have in the future ordinance right now at the next meeting, so we can review that.
Yeah, so that's a review.
All right. I agree with Mr. Myers. I think we just need to kind of see where we're at, benchmark it, and go from there.
I agree. I mean, I'm looking at Mr. Fox's handout regarding noise, and this is from outdoor event venues. This has nothing to do with what you're doing inside a commercial establishment. This is purely outdoor noise.
Revisit?
I think we can revisit this here. I think we can do this in-house.
Williams?
Yeah. I think I was clear. It's we did our due diligence when we came up with this. So if it's something we need to revisit, then let's revisit and take a look at it. But what I don't want is each and every time someone wants to come up with a business that challenges the noise ordinance, that we're revisiting it because uh it doesn't constray with what their business plan is.
Yeah, but I'm
We'll,
trying
but
to
we'll revisit.
foresee, as a county, if we can, we have areas in the master plan that are commercial areas, I mean, that are intended for that purpose, and here we go making,
Well, this again is another part of the discussion that we'll have at the revisit.
right,
I just don't want to continue to broaden this discussion because we're not going to be investing the time that really
what is,
there could be a change.
what is the approach? that we
So
should-
now we just look for a motion for the revisit, no?
I think we have consensus, so staff will work with Mr. Moss to see when the next time we have time on the agenda. 'Cause the next agenda item is our favorite CIP, so that's usually a pretty full night. But I think we have consensus that staff is gonna highlight what we have so that we can discuss it further.
Okay.
Yep. And then we can look at all the different variants, outdoor venue or inside, and that's when we'll have that discussion.
Take up the amplified noise issue in that
Yes, sir.
context. That sounds good.
Great.
As I alluded to, the next item on the agenda is a request for public hearing for our CIP request. It's our favorite time of the year where we will hear from each department head of their various requests so that you can rank them. So at this time, I'm looking for a motion for a public hearing of next month.
I move we schedule a public hearing for capital improvement requests for fiscal year 24-28.
Second.
All in favor?
Yep. Man, that comes around quick, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Well, they have moved it up. You're not crazy. It did get moved up this year. They're trying to do it simultaneously with the budget.
But thank you for
So it
confirming that
is
I'm not
earlier.
crazy. I'm sure he's still out on that.
All right.
Next up
One
is
more item.
short-term rentals.
Right. Short-term rentals.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Louis Pancotti, Senior Planner, and I wanted to just take this opportunity to revisit the short-term rental regulations in the new draft ordinance. So short-term rentals have been quickly on the rise in communities across the country. Easy-to-use apps have made these units more accessible and sometimes cheaper than traditional hotels and motels. They also provide more options to transient as well as homeowners. There are several benefits to short-term rentals. Short-term rentals give homeowners the opportunity to generate extra income by renting out rooms or even the entire house. This can come in handy when homeowners use the house just as a vacation home or as a second home. It can easily be rented out when not in use. Short-term rentals can help promote tourism by providing more and sometimes cheaper options for tourists. And with proper regulations, they can be taxed similar to hotels with the transient tax. There are, however, several reasons why communities decide to regulate this use. One fear is becoming a community of transients where your neighbors change all the time and the character of the community is seen as, by some in the community, as changing. Nuisances such as noise stemming from rental property is also a concern. There's a phenomenon they call, in those articles that were in the packet, a party house that's continuously rented out by larger parties that have noise going all into the night in what could be a quiet residential neighborhood. These units can contribute to a loss of service jobs, particularly in the hotel industry as hotels become less popular. Some communities also fear that companies and even individuals will buy up a portion of the housing stock that could be used for affordable housing for residents only to convert them into short-term rentals. And lastly, without proper regulation, registration, tracking, and enforcement, sometimes owners of short-term rentals just avoid paying transient tax. So the draft ordinance for the new zoning ordinance includes regulations for short-term rentals in section 7-3-12. This section defines the use as a residential dwelling unit that is used or advertised for rent for transient occupancy in increments of fewer than 92 consecutive days. This use does not include bed and breakfast establishment and does not apply month-to-month extensions following completion of a year's lease. It then defines a host as the owner of a short-term rental unit or leasee of a short-term rental unit with the lease agreement is 1 year greater in length, who occupies the property as his or her principal place of residence and domicile. In determining compliance with this regulation, the host has the burden of demonstrating that the dwelling unit is his or her primary residence. Staff has received several concerns from citizens and individuals in the real estate industry about this requirement that the host must occupy the property as their primary residence. So staff wanted to see if the Planning Commission would like to change this provision, or if the Commission would like staff to research any particular questions or concerns regarding short-term rentals and changing that specific provision. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
So what's in the draft ordinance comes from the boilerplate that Berkeley Group normally uses, their standard phraseology in this instance, or is this drawn from other counties and
A lot of counties regulate it in different ways. It's kind of a mixed bag. This is just what Berkeley Group chose to present as, I guess, looking at our community and what would best fit is typically how they draft these ordinances.
yeah, they kind of give us a starting point, then it's up to us to move high or low from there, left or right.
So if I remember correctly, and I think it's been fairly recently, there were some issues out at Lake Anna where people were piling the houses, and there was like, well and septic. There were like 2-bedroom houses, and there were 20 people staying in them, and it was, tearing up the septic systems and stuff like that. So I believe that's in Spotsylvania and Louisa counties. Is that right? I think they were doing some ordinance changes to address that. And I'm not sure what those were, but it might be worth looking into, because I think there were some changes, if I remember correctly, that they were making to their ordinances to address those concerns.
Northumberland, I think, is going through this also.
I mean, that's certainly something we can look into. For tonight, I just wanted to see what your thoughts were, and if you would like to direct staff to do some further research into it, we could certainly do that.
Yeah.
Have you a little cross-section of how other neighboring counties are, a little review of what they're doing?
I did look into it. It is kind of, since this is kind of a newer use, it's hard to just find anything on their online ordinances. A lot of them don't address it at all. I know some localities in Virginia just still treat it as a bed and breakfast, so it would probably be even require a special exception just to put your house on Airbnb. But I looked at Spotsylvania and Stafford. There isn't anything in their ordinance that explicitly addresses or it uses the term short-term rentals, but I could certainly look deeper into that and see how they operate.
Louis, is there anything that requires an owner to report that the home is being used in that manner?
Yes, so state code does give the county the ability to keep a registry of short-term rentals.
Okay. Maybe I'm confused, I don't know. But when I think of like an Airbnb, I think of a place that the owner does not live. So I'm kind of confused why the owner would have to occupy the place. I mean, like if you owned an Airbnb at Myrtle Beach and you rented it out, you obviously don't live there. Maybe I'm missing something there, but
I agree. I agree with you.
I'm wondering if this is kind of again, a starting point, because we had the ancillary dwelling discussion. And if you're going to have an ancillary dwelling, then you probably want to have the
but isn't this
owner
the draft
there
ordinance for our final thing from Berkeley Group? Isn't that what that is?
Yes, this is in the last draft.
So we've already addressed it and gone through it, and this is what's supposed to be in it, right?
This is
without readdressing
the
it.
current draft, but This would be a tweak, just if you wanted to just wipe that line out, I would consider that a tweak.
Yeah, because I agree. I mean, I don't understand short-term rental. I don't know that the owner
yeah,
would live there.
This is one end of the spectrum. This is the most restrictive, more or less, you can get. So taking it out is the other end of the spectrum, the least restrictive. Is there a middle ground that anybody wants to discuss? Right?
I mean, there's certainly.
it's more than a tweak.
That could be up to you. I know I did briefly talk with Berkeley Group about this. One of their other ideas were maybe if the resident wasn't a primary, or the owner wasn't a primary resident, that would not be by right, that would be by special exception.
That's a good rule.
Do you know how many short-term rentals we have in the county right now?
No, we currently do not have a registry of them.
But, and that's where I was going to go. If we did it by special exception, it would help build that registry because they would be flagged.
Yes, but are you just saying just ones where the primary resident is the host, or all of them need a special exception?
Yeah, in my head, I just assumed that the owner did not use it as their primary resident. And then that's where I was speaking from special exception perspective. Because I think in my head, I'm thinking ancillary dwelling, you have a basement apartment, you have something that we've talked about. To me, that definition would fit the ancillary dwelling.
Yeah. But the way I look at this is it's no different than me owning a home in Spotsylvania and I rent it to tenants for a year versus renting it month to month with different people. I understand what your presentation says about transient situations and all of that, but from a business standpoint, it's the same. You're doing the same thing with just a shorter lease. So I don't see the need for someone to have to say this is my primary residence. I don't see it. I'd move to strike it.
Why would someone need to rent a whole house for less than 92 days? I mean, transient short-term rental, I think of as a room
It is very popular to rent out the whole house.
for less than 92 days.
Yes, my wife and I have done it for weekends. It's there you get more space than you would at a hotel. You also get a backyard if you're bringing dogs or something like that. So it again gives transients more options. Yes.
If we were to strike that language, would an HOA still have the authority to kind of supersede that within the HOA?
Covenants can be stricter than the zoning ordinance, but as to specifically if they can regulate that, I don't know. I mean, generally speaking, I would say yes, but I don't know if there's any legal statute where they would not be able to.
Personally, I'm leaning sort of in favor of kind of striking that out because it seems a little overly restrictive. But with the caveat maybe that HOAs, should have
I
some.
don't think you have HOA will have its own governing body. I mean, we don't have.
Problem is your covenants were written before all this.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you get someplace with like a beach or something like that, then you have a bunch of other people who aren't homeowners using the facilities. Again, I'm not on either side of it. I don't know what else.
I'm just hoping we would reserve some discretion for HOAs to govern themselves relating to this if they wanted to.
Yeah, they will. They're a legal entity, and then
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have somebody move in and say, well, the county says I can do it. I don't care what the HOA says.
well, then the HOA will get their lawyer.
Okay. Just want to be sure.
Yeah, so our action here, then, if I understand you correctly, Lewis, is if you don't mind, you're up to it. Y'all are going to go poke around and find out what some of the other localities nearby have done, or what's in the art of the possible.
Sure.
what, protects adjacent landowners and such, and what also would be, the most feasible.
Okay, but for the most part, you still are interested in keeping the Airbnb or short-term rental as a by right use in like the agricultural and residential zoning districts, regardless. Okay, because
Oh, I mean, think so. Right?
Yeah.
all right, yep, we can certainly look into that. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us
Yeah,
to.
didn't know that.
That brings us to director's report.
If some of you remember in our last year's CIP, we requested to scan all of our documents. We did put that up for bid, and bids came in much higher. So we have hired a part-time person to do those scanning for us, which is great, but it's going to take us a little longer. So I wanted to update you guys on that. We are still having that goal of having that public-facing portal and having those documents available for much greater ease for our customers. Additionally, Jackie Fish is now our new executive administrative assistant in the county administrator's office. She has promised that she will hold on as our minutes as long as she can keep up with the work demand. So we are happy that we now do things like YouTube and she doesn't have to be here, but still provide the great service that she does to us, because we see what a great job she does doing those minutes, and I certainly don't want to do it. In January, we did 7 new single-family dwellings and a total of 103 permits for a monthly revenue of $48,997. The Bowen subdivision exception request was approved at the February Board of Supervisors meeting. We didn't have any new projects on our list this month, but we do have the popular question of if Chick-fil-A is still coming. They are. We were hoping to get them permits very soon. I did speak with the developer of Chipotle and Five and Below, and they are planning for a May opening. So some exciting new things in the county. That's all I have.
Thank you. Motion to accept?
Oh, we're good on that.
You don't have to accept them?
No, we can't stop her.
Beautiful. Done. All right. Other business? No other business. All right. Motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
All right.